This is an article that originally appeared in The Hill. The World Bank released the numbers for that. Yeah, the portion of the world's population in extreme poverty, adjusted for local prices, declined from 36% in 1990 to 10% in 2015. This is an amazing reduction in extreme poverty. Now, obviously, extreme poverty is defined as $1.90 a day. That's what the World Bank has determined is what's needed in order to get the basic necessities in your life each day. So enough food, water, shelter, clothing to be able to have some minimal quality of life. Obviously, it's not like a middle class life. But you have, with $1.90 a day, they say you have everything you need to get through the day. So even though the population over that time increased by 2 billion, the number of people that live below that figure was reduced by 1.2 billion. So over that time, 130,000 people rose out of poverty every day. The United Nations Summit in 2000, they set the goal of having the 1990 incidence of extreme poverty by 2015. They did that before 2010, like 2008 or 2009 sometime. So according to estimates from the Brookings Institution, which is the oldest think tank in the United States, considered non-political. Pretty much every former Fed chair goes there as like an affiliated scholar. They're considered extremely unbiased, put it that way. The global middle class, so this is across the entire world, grew by 2.3 billion during those 25 years. In the 2018 World Bank report, the extreme poverty rate had dropped to 10% as of 2015, which is the last year they had comprehensive data for the entire world. And the global population living in extreme poverty has fallen below 750 million for the first time since the World Bank began collecting the statistics back in 1990. So it's a decline of more than 1 billion people in 25 years. This is fantastic news about how much better the world has been getting. Obviously, $1.90 is still not a lot. So, and there's still people living on less than $1.90 a day. But this has been great progress in the past 25, 30 years that we don't talk about enough. So here's a graph of the world population living in poverty. The green is the number of people not in extreme poverty, number of people that are able to live decent lives and have more than $1.90 a day, adjusted over time for inflation. The red is people who are living in extreme poverty. So even though we've seen the world population dramatically increase, pretty much everyone in that increase has been living above the extreme poverty line. And since it's about like the late 60s, maybe 1970, the absolute number of people living in extreme poverty has gone down. So it's not just relative numbers, it's absolute numbers going down. In the time it took me to change that slide, 6 people in India went from below the global poverty line to above the global poverty line. This is fantastic growth that the news misses. And Steven Pinker, who talks about the age of enlightenment, talks about enlightenment scholars, and about how important those ideas are for the world. I mean, this is just one of his many tweets. Why hasn't this made headlines? Half the world is now middle class or richer. And the fall in extreme poverty is down 75% in 30 years. But having half of the world population now being considered middle class, and obviously the global middle class is lower than what we consider the American middle class. But half of the world are able to meet those necessities to be considered part of the middle class, which is obviously having some sort of savings. I don't think car is in there because a lot of other countries don't drive like Americans do, but having some sort of transportation, like a bicycle or access to the public transportation daily. This sort of lifestyle is now available to half the world population. Whereas 1820, so basically 200 years ago, almost no one could be considered not living extreme poverty. So while there may be reasons to not be super excited about what's going on in the world, there might be a lot of dangers, there might be a lot of threats to the world continuing to get better. At the end of the day, over the past 30, 40 years, we've seen unprecedented gains in welfare for so much of the world's population. And that's something I think we need to keep in mind. Any questions about that or anything you guys want to add or say about it?
I'm pretty sure the reason for that is just because of how big technology has played a role in like South and Southeast Asia. So many people who couldn't have jobs, they now need to use men with like laptops, smartphones, and thus a lot of people were able to get jobs.
They used to work on farms, and now they're going into the cities to work those manufacturing
like
jobs.
Singapore, Indonesia, actually,
Yeah.
in that area.
Same thing that happened in Britain in like the 1820s, 1840s, now happening in those places. Which is really cool. You think now like, all right, working in a factory kind of sucks. Anyone here work in a factory? I worked in a factory as a summer job. It sucks. It beats the hell out of working on like, 12, 14, 16-hour days on these farms though. And it's actually a lot safer. Despite how unsafe those factories are, still safer than working on the farm. But think of the next generation, the generation after that. These people work in factories, their lives aren't great, but they're getting more money than they used to have. They can save some money up. Their kids don't have to start working with them younger, so they can go to school longer and learn more, so they can get better jobs themselves. Within a generation or two, I'm thinking of like the changes we've seen in China. Went from an extremely poor, impoverished agricultural society. Now they have a burgeoning middle class, and they're buying like consumer goods. Imagine this process continuing in these other East Asian countries. Kind of changes we're going to see. It's fantastic. I definitely wish it was faster. But still, the fact that it's even happening, when all of human history, we have not been above that global poverty line. All right, I'm gonna pick up where I left off. Try to find them in my notes. Okay, so we left off, we were gonna talk about the market for crystal meth. Do you guys think crystal meth has elastic or inelastic demand? Think people are very sensitive to price, the price of crystal meth? Why not? It's addictive? All right, that's right. So there's very inelastic demand. So we've got a demand curve. I'm assuming that it's not perfectly inelastic, that some people are able to overcome their addiction. Some people choose not to begin using crystal meth. But overall, if you use crystal meth, you're not going to substantially reduce how much you buy if the price increases. All right, so here we have, I just drew normal supply curves. Didn't worry about the elasticity or inelasticity of those, but I wanted to highlight the extremely inelastic demand curve. So here we have the supply curve shifting. There's a serious reduction in the amount of crystal meth available for sale. You see the price increase substantially. So from line crosses here, the equilibrium, now the new equilibrium is up here. We don't see very much of a change in the quantity demanded because it's inelastic. Because consumers aren't responding to a change in the price of crystal meth, they're not going to substantially reduce the quantity they buy. I think, why is this? What are the determining factors for using crystal meth? So there's obviously lack of substitutes because of the physical addiction. Like, it's, you desire those chemicals. But there's also utility involved. There's also the high that individuals get from using crystal meth. There's also the length of time it lasts, which sets it apart from other drugs that give maybe a similar high. But price isn't really a factor in choosing to do crystal meth. If you think of a cheaper good, like maybe think of like ramen noodles, price does play a fairly significant, has a significant impact in whether or not you're going to purchase it. That can be a determining factor. There's a lot of goods that advertise that, hey, this is the same quality at a lower price. No one in the market for crystal meth is doing that.
Is anyone really advertising crystal meth?
No, it's very difficult to advertise when it's something illegal. So you're not seeing billboards put out. But there is, some word of mouth and trying to convince people to buy. Again, if you're like Ricky Bobby, you're a nice drug dealer. You're just offering it to them. You're not trying to force it on them. So trying to affect the supply side, which is what we talked about, how that's the U.S. war on drugs. That's our policy, is to reduce the supply of drugs. It has a very small effect for usage. Individuals are going to continue to use those drugs, once they develop a taste for it, once they have some sort of physical addiction to it. So non-addicts and non-meth lovers will have less usage. So if you've used meth a couple times, you kind of like the high, but you're like, oh, I can smoke crack, or I can use some cocaine. You'll shift into those if, the price is lower, if it's easier to purchase that. Non-addicts, because of the difficulty, there's a reduction in supply, price is pretty high, are gonna be less likely to get into it on the margin. They're gonna be less willing to, try it for the first time. So what we see is the war on drug policy increases the cost for habitual users. People that use it consistently aren't really going to decrease their demand, but they're going to have to pay more for it. So what this implies is that we're going to see even more crime by addicts who can't afford the drugs that they desire. Remember, one of the side effects of drug usage, one of the reasons why we try to stop drug usage, is the crime that accompanies it. It's antisocial because, people get addicted to drugs, have to commit crimes to afford them. But what this policy ends up doing is encouraging people to commit more crimes because it's now more expensive. Policy also reduces the quantity sold by drug dealers, but they receive a greater revenue for each sale. So again, we have the quantity here decreasing a little bit, but the price they're receiving per unit of crystal meth is much higher. So they end up profiting even more. Those, who haven't been arrested, who haven't been caught, who haven't rationally decided to leave the market and to sell a legal alternative. Yes. So we end up with unintended consequences from the war on drugs. First, crime is promoted because it's a black market. There's no arbiter, no independent arbiter, no Judge Judy in order to settle disputes. So the best way to do that is through violence. Kind of obvious. No one's going to stiff you on a payment if they know you're going to break their kneecaps. Rivals are likely to engage in violent turf battles to expand their sales. Again, they can't compete. They can't, advertise that they offer a superior product. You can't go to the Better Business Bureau and see which drug dealer is better. So they end up engaging in turf battles, trying to expand the territory that they're in monopoly selling drugs within. And also, the black market attracts high time preference individuals. By high time preference, what I mean is individuals that place a lot of value on immediate gratification, and they discount the future. So you guys all know J.G. Wentworth, those commercials? It's my money and I need it now. So a high time preference individual would prefer to get that money now, a whole lump sum payment up front, minus the cost of the future income stream, instead of getting payments slowly over time. Because rather than valuing the future, they value the present a lot more. So they're going to be a lot less likely to save for retirement. So a high time preference individual, someone really focused on the here and now, might save 2% for retirement. Whereas someone who looks more to the future, a low time preference individual, will save, say, 4, 6, 8%. They'll save a lot more because they value the future a lot more. Now, these individuals that have a preference for instant gratification, they tend to take a lot of risks. So you get a lot, people who are willing and are more than happy to engage in risky behavior, operating in a market where violence is used to settle disputes and to increase your revenue. So on average, you'll see, because of the type of person it attracts, you're going to see even more violence. Think of movies. Have you guys seen Scarface? A couple people seen Scarface. Engages in a lot of violence to try to expand his market, to hold on to his market. He would qualify as a risk-taking, a high time preference individual. What's cool, do you know the Scarface we all talk about from the 80s with Pacino? That was a remake. The original was from like 29, and it was about alcohol prohibition. And it's from 29, but it's still a decent movie. Like it was a talkie, like talking to each other. It's not a silent film, but it starts at the beginning with because prohibition was going on. They said this is it's basically anti-prohibition propaganda, saying all the problems that alcohol prohibition was causing. And they're like, look, this is an example. And they do it in an entertaining movie. Probably shouldn't have used that example yet, because what I was going to end with this was saying these are all the things we saw happen in alcohol prohibition. There's also a welfare effect. Oh, and last one for this I didn't write down. The black market encourages the bribery and corruption of government officials. So whether it's law enforcement or whether it's those, customs agents, or whether it's people actually designing the laws, the drug laws. Obviously, you're trying to evade detection. You're going to try to bribe those individuals, to look the other way. So it gives an opportunity for those officials to be bribed. Some of them will, be more than willing to take the money. People like Logan and myself willing to take the money and the beer, head out. There's also a welfare effect on users. It decreases the quality of the goods. In this case, is the drugs. There's no quality control. You can say, companies operating in a free market don't have the best quality control. You can point out problems with, say, Samsung's phone that catches on fire. But there is no quality control in the black market. There's far less of a reason to actually have quality control, engage in that. If you harm somebody with a defective product in the market, again, you go to a judge, or you take them to court, and you sue them, and you get damages, or you threaten to do that, and they just pay you off before you even go. You use drugs, illegal drugs, something goes wrong, you can't take them to court and sue them. It's like you see those, the Florida Man news stories. There's the husband calls the cops on his wife or on his girlfriend and says hey, she stole my drugs. Come down here and get them. You guys seen that? I follow the Florida Man Instagram account. They make fun of all the weird news stories from Florida. But that's a classic. He stole my drugs, or she stole my drugs. You can't go to law enforcement if someone wrongs you in this market. Also, prohibition increases the potency per unit. So because it's because it's illegal, so you're trying to hide the product that you're selling, you're going to put it in a more potent form. So it's physically smaller, easier to get past people looking. I'd rather have like one crate and have it like hidden in there of product than have a fucking warehouse full of it. Easier to spot a warehouse full of drugs than a crate full of drugs. So the more concentrated forms of drugs are easier to hide. There's also risky consumption method is encouraged. So people actually using the drugs will use them in riskier ways in order to maximize, I said the ROI, the return on investment, but in this case, the return on actually doing the drugs. To get a better high or longer lasting high, they'll consume it in weirder and weirder ways or riskier ways. Again, because it's illegal. So there's this fixed cost that exists in avoiding authorities. So it incentivizes the shift to more potent drugs. So moving from one form of drugs to another. And also within that type of drug, so within crystal meth, you're using stronger and stronger variants or more concentrated forms. Anyone remember this theory that we talked about before? You've got a fixed cost placed on two goods. Demand shifting from one to the other. Yes. So in this case, it's not from a low quality cigarette to a high quality cigarette. It's from lower potency drug to higher potency drug. Because you've got this fixed cost of, I can be arrested for doing this. People are more naturally going to do more of the stronger variants. Get that better high. Because you're going down anyway. Who here is not 21? A lot of hands go up. Okay. Do any of you guys consume alcohol? All right, good. Yeah, no one admitted to a crime. Good. So when I wasn't 21, I'm sure statute of limitations is up. All right, so when I wasn't 21 and I wanted to drink, I drank liquor. Because you get a bottle, it can last you for the weekend. You can hide it in a water bottle and take it with you. Once I turned 21, I started drinking a lot more beer. Because, again, it's easier to hide a bottle of liquor than it is a case of beer. Easier to dispose of without getting caught. You don't have, 30 cans in your room. So a lot of people shift to, before they're 21, drink liquor, drink harder stuff. Drink it quickly and hide the evidence a lot easier. Get rid of the evidence, hide it a lot easier than drinking weaker forms. So the fixed costs of avoiding authorities incentivizes the shift to more potent drugs, whether it's stronger forms of alcohol. So if you're trying to sneak alcohol into a stadium, how are you sneaking it in? Flask? Water bottle full of vodka? Or clear rum? Are you trying to bring in a case of beer in all your pockets? This dude got caught trying to bring in like 2 cases of beer to, I think it was in Europe, to a soccer game. It was in like the very early fall. So the article says like everyone's walking in like t-shirts and he's wearing a winter coat and a scarf. And like they stopped him and they pulled out like 60 beers from the dude. Now that's crazy, it's so easy to get caught doing that. But had he just strapped 2 plastic flasks to each leg, one to each leg, he'd have been fine. There are other ways, they made that the thing, the water pack you put on your back and you suck through the tube out of it. They make one that fits on your front, looks like a beer belly, and you fill that full of booze and it's easy. No one's gonna when they kind of pat you down, they don't pat your stomach down like that. So you can sneak it in that way.
But again, you're going to use stronger forms of alcohol when you're trying to sneak into a stadium. Just like you're going to use stronger forms of drugs when they're illegal. Also, something we're not going to get into, a little too political for this class, is the militarization of police and the spending of a ton of resources in trying to stop drugs, when the quantity of drugs being consumed doesn't decrease by that much. So further, inflames violence. So just some insights from the economic way of thinking about drug prohibition. It's not the nature of the product that causes problems in society. It's the institutions that develop around it. So most of the violence is due to the black market, not to drugs themselves. That's not to say drugs don't have negative effects on people, and even that some drugs don't make people more likely to engage in violence. I'm pretty sure alcohol makes people more willing to get into fights than when they're sober. But most of the violence is due to the nature of the black market and the inability to have a neutral third party settle disputes, an inability to use a legal system. There's other very different illegal products that have similar problems. So prostitution and gambling, where gambling is illegal, or when that type of gambling is illegal, have very similar problems with violence and organized crime that goes around it, because again, this is the black market they're operating within. Alcohol in the 1920s was extremely violent. The strength of alcohol increased substantially during Prohibition. So the liquor got a lot more strong, for lack of a better term. And also that's how cocktails came about, because it tasted so terrible because there was no quality control, and they were literally making gin in bathtubs. That they had to start mixing it with stuff just so people could stand the taste of it. And there's also legal stimulants with similar characteristics that aren't plagued by violence. I don't want to compare coffee and crystal meth, but there's other things that provide people energy legally that don't have violence like we see in these black markets. So while there are definitely good reasons to make drugs illegal, the violence that accompanies it is mostly due to the black market and to, like I said, the institutions that exist around it not being able to use the legal system we have, not being able to advertise, and there's no competition based on quality. We see a lot of problems that develop because of it being illegal. This is just another case of where we could use the tools of economics, whether it's looking at the Allen effect or using supply and demand, thinking about elasticities, or just thinking about incentives encouraging people to do something legal versus illegal. A lot of different areas where we can use these tools to understand what's going on. And here we go. Sonjal and Patrick, they're the DEA and whatever government officials are passing these laws. We did it. We saved the city. There's violence and fire and things being destroyed. All right, so let's take a break. Since you guys aren't super into questions, I got a question for a bunch of you guys. If you traveled back to the year 700 AD, what's one invention you'd bring with you? Something that's useful, but is not going to get you killed for being a witch. That's the hardest part. Because I'm like, oh yeah, I'd bring back my cell phone. Show that bad boy off. I'd be burned at the stake before the battery died.
Just because you said 700 AD.
Yeah, 700 AD.
I could see a lot of wealthy people, they like their golds and whatever. They like a grill, so that they can wear that instead of. So when they lose their teeth, they can put that in instead.
So now you've got the example grill to use.
GEORGE.
I like it. I saw this question posed online. Someone said, like, what they call brewing technology, something to make beer, because beer is being brewed back then, and it's fairly simple. Like you don't need complicated stuff. People will like it, and you won't get killed for it. See, I would say something like a musket, like a simple gun.
Well, then you're a threat.
You're a threat. And it's not even like having a machine gun where you're like better than everyone else. Like it's gonna take you forever to reload it. So at that point you're fighting hand to hand anyway.
That's what
The bayonet.
yeah.
Well, someone has a broadsword, a bayonet's not really gonna help though. This is hard. Maybe a map, a good map. If someone rips it, then you're screwed.
Well, maybe they'll think it's a fake. You're giving us false info.
Yeah, we didn't have accurate maps until like the 1900s, so. So just getting someone to believe you would be like impossible.
Like a boat or something, a big cruise ship. Like, I don't know if that's like small, but like you bring
Yeah,
it
just
up,
like one thing. So I guess a cruise ship.
and then you could invent a communication line between the new land and the old land and turn it profit.
It takes everyone like months to cross the Mediterranean. You can go across in like 2 days. But what are you gonna use for fuel? That's the problem. Everything we've invented requires like 8 other inventions at least to use back then.
What about a very standard fishing rod? Instead of using spears, people will fish that have a much.
When did they invent like normal fishing poles?
Well, let's find out. They probably had terminal alarm systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it probably was like tied to the end.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking
Okay.
like. James-
900
Like that is-
BC.
Oh, never mind. Oh, wow. I'm like 1,600 years. built.
Like with the reel?
Oh,
Um,
no.
I mean, not that, but I'm just saying it was made the first. So let's say my more advanced.
But wouldn't it be better just use like the nets? Well, no, that's only really good for the ocean, right?
Yeah,
It wouldn't really help you if you're fishing in like a stream or a river.
I guess it all depends on where we're really looking.
Really batteries would be another.
What would you put in a battery or use like?
But like, it's a way, like, it's a step towards electricity without having to go through everything.
I think it could be simple enough that you wouldn't get like burned for it. I think that's a possibility.
I think like deodorant or cologne. I don't know if it's too special, but I think the smells would like draw crowds from. Like,
Oh yeah.
everywhere.
Well, that's why weddings used to be in May, because that was after like, or that's like in England, because that was after their annual bath. That's why the bride carries the flowers, or the
So
smell.
yeah, can you
That's
imagine?
where pocket squares come from. People like walking in London would pour, or not pour, but like spray perfume on them, and when you walk down the street, so you can smell the excrement, you would hold it up over your mouth.
But can you imagine when like Prince Charming comes again, instead of smelling like the sweat, determination, and tears, you smell Bear Glove by Old Spice.
That would be good.
Wouldn't that
If you
just
brought
be
it back and
sort
could
of
figure out how to make more of it,
I mean, maybe it would be too hard because they have to just find a way to like, as long as they can have like it not touch anything to like ruin its integrity and like keep it concealed, just like, and then you like, I don't know, like swipe your fingers in it and rub it. 2 times left like that.
I like. Now you'd have like every like monarch and like lord like bidding over your services. I mean, I would not want to live in 700 AD, but if I had to, I'd at least want to live in a castle, like with royalty.
I think bring back like all the information and then become an advisor to somebody.
Was that Back to the Future gets a sports almanac?
Yeah.
But how trustworthy is history of the Middle Ages, though? You can only like really like profit or like do well for the next like 50 years.
Well, if you brought like information on like military tactics, you could advise a king something.
Yeah, bring the art of war.
Exactly. The goblins. So, I mean, I guess during the Middle Ages, the only real, some like significant things that were going on was like music. So if you brought some like 1700s like music, think of like 1800s, some modern music, give them like a sample, and then they'd have to figure out how to like recreate that. Music itself would change.
Like the movie where like the dude got hit on the head or something, and then everyone else in the world forgot about the Beatles.
Yeah.
Just go back and like play like the Beatles and Bob Dylan and like.
It's not necessarily
Actually, yeah, like instrument would be a good one
Yeah, it's
because
not
they're
like-
not super fancy unless it's like a synth like keyboard.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about the instruments themselves, it's more how music would progress over history.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And at that point, we'd have a whole instrument.
Take back the assembly line, like the idea of it, just mass produced everything and make a bunch of money.
I feel like that'd be the most valuable thing. It's just the ideas, like the things we know nowadays.
Go get Henry Ford's patent. Start making cars.
I had one, not forget about it.
For like a real stupid one that would confuse a lot of people. Do you know how we like apparently have like you have the taste of banana and then you have the taste of, like banana candy,
Yeah.
something like that, and how like they're completely different? Just like bring all the banana candy like back, and just like tell people it's banana and this is the banana like of the future. It may get you killed, but it would confuse a lot of people.
But most of the world didn't know what bananas were back then
Well,
because
where are
they're tropical.
we? You just said 700 BC.
Yeah, so it could be anywhere.
Yeah.
Bringing a penguin to someone, that would be crazy.
In the 1800s, like late 1800s, people in like Northern Europe, I guess pretty much all of Europe, thought that all sorts of monkeys were a myth.
Could you imagine
It was like people freaked out when they brought the first ever photograph of an ape back to Europe. It was like the late 1800s. It's shocking how little knowledge people had of the world back then.
Can you imagine like you're living in Europe and then you're going to go to battle with someone from like, let's say, like Africa or Asia, and then out of nowhere in the distance you see like a 20-foot tall beast, which would be an elephant coming at you.
Well, that's when Hannibal marched to Carthage, around up through Spain and got like 2 elephants that didn't die in the Alps, like into Rome. Alexander freaked out when he got like close to India and like encountered elephants. I think that's why he stopped before he died of the flu.
All that and his army. What they've been battling for 10 years.
Across like half the world, like
Yeah.
all the known world. Like they thought the world was over and it just kept going and going and they kept fighting and fighting. I can't imagine what that would be like.
I feel like you would be excited, but then at the same time you'd be like, we have to do this again.
Wait, you're telling me there's more? There's always like boring answers like the movable printing press. 'Cause that wasn't that advanced, but that's some people say that's what spurred.
I got one last
Really?
one.
All right.
You have to find a specific leader, give them their obituary. If they don't like how they're looking.
You're gonna die then.
Oh,
They're
I mean,
gonna
maybe,
kill you.
Maybe, but hey.
You mean physically hand them their obituary?
Yeah, like how they're perceived in history. Get a bunch of documents that like write about them. I don't know.
That's ballsy.
It's very, very.
You're either their most trusted advisor and like the claimant to the throne once they die, or you're dead.
Hey, I'll take my chance.
I mean, it's 700 AD. Odds are you're going to die within a year anyway.
Hey, exactly.
I don't know. You have like your shots and all that by then, right?
That's true. We're saying we have all our shots.
Yeah.
Okay. But still, you get a cut infected and you're dead.
Bring back vaccines then. Ruin the entirety of modern medicine.
Oh, bring alcohol swipes. Think about that.
I mean, that would save you.
Some
Give you
people
a high
think
quality
it's
life.
Infection, like an open infection, swats and alcohol over it.
Oh my God, they'll think you're a god.
No, they'll hurt though. So
Still think you're poison them, basically.
True. So it's risky.
we could have an entire class.
We could just sit around and bullshit forever. So I'm gonna stop that with different bullshit, and then we'll get back to this. And you guys heard about the conspiracy theory that they made up 300 years in the Middle Ages?
Wait, you mean like just
Like it's the year 1700 right now instead of the year 2000. First of all, so how they figure out dates going back through a lot of like European history is through the tree rings, the carbon dating on the trees. Well, they take this one tree all the way back to like 1300, and then they can't find any like of those trees preserved, so they skip to a different tree, which is very unscientific. And then there's all these places. Obviously, no one was literate back then. This guy gives several examples. So like Otto II of like Germany or something lived in the year 700, but he really wanted to live in the millennium because he was like super like crazy about religion and wanted to live 1,000 years after Christ was born, or rule 1,000 years after Christ was born. So there's an argument that like he changed these dates. In the Byzantine Empire, Justinian, who's like known for like his great like the Code of Justinian, like I don't know, codified all the laws of the Byzantine Empire, took in all the written documents of like the history of the country and of all their laws, or I guess the empire, copied them over and re-released them to the public. There's like instances like throughout Europe, throughout the Middle East, and through North Africa where like these things happened. And the guy who wrote this in an academic journal said, listen, I'm not claiming, like, I'm not making all these outrageous claims. I'm just saying that there's some serious holes in our history that we need to figure out. And we're just taking this stuff as fact.
But why does it matter? Like, why does it matter right now?
History
Year's
can-
2020.
Well, it's not like the year, it's like, another thing went through is architecture. Like, architecture, like, for, like, churches in Europe, were, like, from 700 to 1000 AD, there's, like, no real change. And there's stuff, like, in 1000 that looks like it was made in 700, like, that style, and vice versa. And there's no, like, progression, like, through there. And so it's like, we're missing, like, these slow changes. So, stuff, like, 300 years of history that you learn in school could just be made up. Could be a made-up story. Again, it doesn't really affect us, but, like...
I mean, it took generations to construct churches, though. If they're
Oh,
really
yeah.
intricate.
Yeah, a lot of European churches, like the big ones, took 200-300 years.
I mean,
But you would see like styles change in that over that
Yeah.
time. Like I don't know, like the finished product would be slightly
I just
different.
don't know how many churches were constructed during that time.
Well, what else did they have back then?
Um,
Their entertainment was the thought of the afterlife. And if someone had a guitar, or not a guitar, whatever the stringed version of a guitar was back then.
yeah.
I'm all for this, because then we can prove Back to the Future 2 correct. Real hoverboards by 2015.
And we still got time.
Exactly.
But the guy, I don't know if any of you watch Ancient Aliens, but he says in the paper, he's like, I don't want to be Eric Von Däniken. That's not what I'm trying to do. Because he's a dude he was a real life historian, like worked at a university and gave it all up to write a fake book about aliens, about how they invented everything. And now it stars on that TV show.
How does your life change like that? One day you just like go crazy and like decide that you're gonna like
I don't know.
aliens now?
Because it's not like he wrote about that before. He wrote about normal history. And then one day he decided, oh, like these monuments are really intricate. Aliens did it. And started writing about how aliens did everything.
Maybe he got
He got kidnapped by aliens. Disinformation. Like, all right, people are starting to catch on to us. We're going to kidnap this dude, make him look crazy. He's going to talk about us, and no one will believe him.
Yep. It's a way to do it.
There's worse ways to go about that. All right, back to normal stuff for a few minutes before we get out of here. We'll talk about the result of price controls. It's clear that when the government imposes price controls, few things happen. Some people are made better off. So the winners are those that get the protection. So it's the renters and rent control. It's the farmers with the price floors for agricultural goods. It's the workers in the labor market when there's minimum wage that keep their job. Some people are made worse off. So the losers that are priced out of the market, people that cannot afford to rent in the city because there's aren't able to get it into an apartment because there's a reduction in supply. People that can't afford the more expensive agricultural goods, businesses that can't afford to hire new workers at this higher wage, their surplus is reduced, while the surplus for the winners are increased. In general, the economy suffers because deadweight loss is going to occur. So while the winners are made better off, losers are made worse off, some of it disappears completely. No one gets it. So we're looking at is you want to use a simple metaphor. There's a smaller pie being split up. Whether the government should impose this price control is a different question. Maybe there are serious equity concerns that people need a higher minimum wage, or that they need, we need these price controls, the price floors for agricultural goods. Maybe there's other equity benefits or other sort of benefits that aren't being taken into account here. But because it's the economics class, what we want to focus on is understanding that there's winners, losers, and deadweight loss, and things are being less efficient. So maybe if we have equity concerns, we want poor people to be able to get into houses. So you think, oh, let's do rent control. We look at how rent control happens. What happens once you impose rent control? It turns out fewer people are able to get houses. There's fewer houses on the market or apartments on the market, and they're lower quality. So maybe, all right, if we want poor people to get houses, maybe we design a different policy. Maybe we go about it in a different way to make sure they can get houses, while still making sure the supply is high enough and that people can get the houses they need and that are high enough quality for them to live a decent life. So while there may be nothing wrong with the goal, there may be better ways of reaching that goal. So that's why it's important to understand how these policies work and understand how the policies work and what the impact is going to be, so that we're able to actually reach the goals instead of just saying we want to help and burning down the whole city. Have enough time? Yeah. So runaway inflation back in the 70s had policymakers desperate and then looking for ways to try to stop runaway inflation. I guess you can ask your parents, maybe your grandparents, what the gas lines were like back then. Things were really hectic. Politicians were getting voted out of office constantly because they were unable to solve these problems. So in the 70s, when Nixon was president, he introduced price controls on certain classes of products in order to try to prevent prices from continuing to increase. We had double-digit inflation for several years. So like every year, the price is getting 10% more. Or more than 10%. C. Jackson Grayson was, I don't know if he was an economist, but he was placed in charge of the price commission. It was his job to figure out where to put the caps on these, what price to make the cap and what products they should actually go on to try to prevent prices from increasing like they were. So he came away with several lessons, and he wrote afterwards how difficult it was and what the problems, what the drawbacks of price controls were. So for the section on price controls, I wanted to add in some of the things that he said. So first, the price controls mask real changes in economic fundamentals. Hopefully from when we talked about this class, that makes sense to you, that you can imagine that. So they're implemented to fight inflation, but assumes that all price changes are due to purely inflationary pressures, so just like a greater money supply. That there's no other changes going on between the relative prices. So as we know, changes in supply and demand cause many price changes, and it occurs constantly. And prices display and communicate information. So price controls prevent people from understanding that information, receiving that signal, and then being encouraged to act on it. So if a resource is becoming more scarce, then the price of it's going to increase. People naturally should conserve it. They're going to spend less. They're encouraged to spend less on it, or I guess buy less of it. You can keep spending the same amount on it, but you purchase less of it, so there's more of it to go around. You put price controls on a product, you put a cap on how high it can go, the price can go. You're no longer incentivizing people to purchase less of it. So now you're going to end up with shortages. So price controls prevent that signal from happening. And one of the causes of inflation back in the 1970s was the oil embargo from OPEC. They reduced the supply of oil, being sold to the West. So now prices skyrocket because everything just about needs to be shipped. Also, oil is used in the plastic packaging for everything. You're getting double oil there. But price controls ignored that fundamental, ignored the increased resource costs going into the goods. Next, the role of profit is neglected or it's completely ignored. So it assumes that profit's a result of taking advantage of consumers. It doesn't assume that there's any of these underlying changes going on. So we know it encourages resources to be used in their most valuable combination, their most valuable uses. So it discourages long-run investments, which keeps prices high in the long run. So there's no productivity increases, and there's no shifting of resources from lower value uses to the higher value uses, because prices are not allowed to increase to reflect that. Price controls also replace economic competition with political competition. So instead of firms focusing all their attention on the market, trying to improve their product, trying to convince consumers they're better than their competitors, what they end up doing is competing competing against each other to try to get favorable laws or regulations from the government. So because resources are still scarce, you're still going to have to engage in competition somehow. This competition becomes political instead of more economic. People attempting to get resource or attempting to have the price controls maybe lifted from them or placed on them or placed on their competitors, lifted from their competitors through lobbying government. So not only is they're not spending money on making better products, or at least trying to make better products, or trying to convince consumers that they make better products, but they're spending it on lobbying the government about changing these regulations or changing these laws. So that money is not going to benefit people. Next, it normalizes attitudes of reliance on government. So it threatens the dynamism of markets, which rely on prices and profit and loss to operate. Entrepreneurial efforts, instead of being focused on the next new product or a cheaper way to make the product, it's being focused on dealing with the government, on trying to change the regulations in a way that benefits you. This change of focus prevents people from creating these new goods, these new way of producing goods that help out society. Focuses them in the wrong area. Sometimes people complain of too many smart minds going into things like entertainment, so like movies or sports, when they should be doing things that benefit society more. Whether or not you agree with that, this is a very similar thing, where instead of trying to provide things of value, they're just going to areas, or they're lobbying government, something that doesn't help people in their day-to-day lives. Next, price controls generate regime uncertainty. So there's first ambiguity around the protection of private property, because there's the government messing with the prices you can get for what you own or what you're going to buy. And there's concern about the stability of regulations in the future. So little regime uncertainty is a possibility that these rules or regulations can change in the future. So it makes it more difficult to plan ahead. Because if you don't know if you're going to get slapped with a big tax or a new a new price control that's going to be lower, or if they're going to bump up what the price control is, it makes it much more difficult to plan ahead. Planning is already extremely difficult. This just, I don't know, it introduces another way that things could change, making it more difficult to plan. And finally, price controls mask true economic problems. So it's framed as a response to a market failure, like speculation or greed, but it masks the underlying causes. These real changes to economic fundamentals, you don't know what they are. So prices could be rising due to, it could be monetary policy from the Federal Reserve, increasing the money supply so there's more inflation now. And that's what causes the price to go up. It could be a new tariff that was passed. Just a tax on goods coming into the country is going to increase their prices. It could be new regulation that adds cost to the production of these goods. What else? It could be changes in relative scarcity. It could be the OPEC embargo. We don't know when there are price controls. It also misleads private citizens regarding the fundamental causes of economic problems and the solutions to address those problems. So instead of thinking that the way to lower costs in the long run is to innovate and to improve like the technological processes, instead the focus becomes trying to get price controls to the right level so that everyone can get what they need. To try to lower the price to what they perceive as good. So instead of focusing on the cause, so these increase in costs due to higher resource costs, a higher cost of goods going into this production, it's trying to mask the symptoms later. You should encourage firms, entrepreneurs, individuals, consumers, whoever, to try to fix the underlying problem instead of just trying to deal with the symptoms, the effect afterwards. Sorry, I kind of rushed through that. I wanted to get this section done today. Do you guys have any questions? All right, if not,
The test.
yeah, keep them.